Te, ang lapit na pala ng eleksyon. Kilala mo na ba kung sinong iboboto mo?
Aba, oo. Alam ko na, no?
Talaga.
Oo, syempre. Nagre-research kaya ako.
Research? Paano?
Oo. Teka ha, sandali. Papakita ko yung listahan ko.
Ay,
Oh.
perfect. May listahan.
Ang haba niyan.
Oh,
Eto pansinin mo si number 39. Present yan sa talktik ni Ate B. Alam mo, parang gustong-gusto ko siya kasi sobrang bait niya.
sobrang bait.
Oo, tapos ito, si Ma'am Jamil. Present to sa vlog ni Mami Joni, no? Alam mo, parang matulungin nga siya kasi parang nag-shopping-shopping sila.
Nag-shopping lang, matulungin na.
Ano ba? Please respect my opinion.
Well, I mean, respect, oo. Pero kasi parang may mga something sa mga gusto mong iboto eh.
Anong something?
Well, pag-usapan natin yan. Ang ikalawang episode ng aming podcast na layong magbahagi ng makatotohanan, makabuluhan, at mapanuri na talakayan.
Tungkol sa napapanahong issue ng pangangampanya at pagsuporta ng mga influencer sa mga kandidato ngayong halalan 2025.
Ako si Ralph.
At ako naman si Rice.
At kayo'y nakikinig sa DiversifiED Plus. Ay, grabe. Ilang days na lang pala, eleksyon na.
Oo nga eh. Alam mo ba, halos sa bawat sulok ng aking social media, puro mga kandidato ang lumalabas, ate ko. Tapos, parami pa ng parami yung mga influencer na tumutulong sa kanila.
Well, speaking of influencers, kaya mo ba silang mamukhaan?
Ay, may pag-game show ka ba, ate?
Yes, meron
Oh
akong
my
challenge
God!
for you for today's video. Maglalaroon
Diyos ko
tayo
po.
ng Yiz or Wiz. Kailan mo sabihin niyang Yiz kung nakita mo na itong certain influencer na to
Okay.
sa isang collaboration or appearance sa isang tumatakbong kandidato.
Okay, sige.
At
Madali lang ba yan?
Well, madali lang kung talagang chronically online ka,
Ay,
Rice.
okay, sige.
Starting off strong with Sasa Girl.
Sasa girl. Teka, nakita ko yan sa,
Yiz or
sa
Wiz?
Facebook. Yiz, kay Heidi Mendoza.
Perfect!
Ay, may 1 point na.
Number 2.
Si Pio ba yan?
Alam
For
na
Bam
ala-
Aquino?
Exactly.
Oh my
Edukasyon.
God. Tama.
Edukasyon. At syempre, ang mami ng lahat.
Oh my
Mami
God.
Oni.
Mami Oni. Yiz kay Camille Villar.
Exactly. Grabe naman ang... At ito, si J. Queen.
si Tokyo.
Ay, Eme. Si ano? Sino to?
Si V. Si V
Exactly.
Cortez kay...
Yiz or Wiz?
Yiz kay Camille Villar din.
Diyos ko, puro
Oh my
Camille
God.
Villar. At, well, kung meron tayong V, meron din tayong Kong.
Kong TV.
Yiz or Wiz?
Yiz sa... Ay, nag-attend yan sa ano eh. Parang campaign rally ba yun?
Mhm.
Solid North.
Yes,
Oh.
talaga. At dahil dyan, meron kang 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points.
Thank you
Grabe.
so much
Sobrang
po.
chronically online mo sa part na yun, ha?
Salamat po.
Pero, well, no man is an island. At nakikita rin naman natin, siguro, give natin na medyo active naman talaga itong mga ilang kandidato sa pangangampanya.
Oo. Alam mo sis, sabi nga nung friend ko na isa, mas nakikita pa daw niya yung mga kandidato kasi naglipa na yung mga posters kaysa sa sarili niyang pamilya, ha?
Huy, sinatch ite. Pero true, kanina kasasakay ko ng bus, nagulat ako may mukha ng
Ay, Diyos
kandidato ron. Talagang everything, everywhere, all at once. Itong, well, hindi lang isang kandidato, ha?
Sobrang
Napakarami,
okay.
di ba?
Pero alam mo, parang nagko-compete na kasi sila sa mga billboard kasi tignan mo pag lumabas ka, makikita mo patong-patong yung mga posters. Tapos may makikita ka pa sa EDSA, sa kung saan man. At kung nagsawa ka na rin sa pagtingin, magsasawa ka rin sa pakikinig kasi merong commercial, tapos may broadcast pa. Diyos ko!
Di ba? Parang, Diyos ko, halos yun na lang talaga yung nakokonsumo natin
Oo.
ngayon. Pero, okay, may mga mangilan-ngilan pa rin naman talagang mga community-based na ginagawa itong mga kandidato na to. May mga nagdo-door-to-door pa rin na iilan. At syempre, yung campaign rallies, no?
Alam mo, ang problema ko dyan sa mga campaign rally na yan, sobrang daming artista. Ano to? Imbis na plataforma, parang naging meet and greet. Ano to, Ate SM? May mall show, may kakanta.
Well, speaking of mga ganyang rally, campaign rally, hindi talaga nagpapahuli ang mga kandidato na yan sa kung sino mag-endorse sa kanila ng mga celebrity, no?
Pero alam mo, may bago.
Oh, anas naman niyang bago na yan.
Pati influencers, jumujoin na rin sa mga rally.
Talaga?
At naka-package deal pa yan kasi meron pang social media post.
Well, gets. Kasi dun sila mas nakakakuha ng maraming clout. Lalo na sa mga social media posting nila.
Tama. At saka in this day and age na accessible na ang social media, nagiging main source na rin ng political news and updates ang...
Social media.
Ang galing mo.
'Di ba? Kasi true naman talaga. Kaya for today, try nating talakayin, no? Ano nga ba ang epekto nito sa mga botante?
Kaya let's sit back and relax at muling balikan ang history kung papaano ba humantong sa popularity contest ang pagtakbo sa politika.
Alam nyo ba na before pa tayo mapunta sa mga influencer na yan, ay matagal na talagang nangihingi ng endorsement itong mga tumatakbo sa mga sikat na tao.
At syempre, alam mo noong panahong hindi pa naman gaano ka-accessible ang internet, sino pa ba ang mga sikat? Kundi ang mga artista.
Well, tama yan. Kaya yung nagiging rason nila, kahit di mo man kilala yung iboboto mo, ang mahalaga, kilala mo kung sino yung nag-endorse na artista.
Ate ko, idagdag mo pa dyan yung fandom syndrome.
Fandom syndrome! Ano ba yung fandom syndrome na yan, Rice?
Siyempre, fans want to be like their idols. Kaya isa sa mga bahagi ng influence ng celebrities ay ang mapaniwala ang fans nila na, hey, baka maganda rin pala siyang iboto.
Well, ganun ba yung sinasabi, o yung parang ganun ba yung effect na ginagawa ni Nadine Lustre sa re-election ni Laila de Lima? At syempre yung kay Maha Salvador, sa Solid North?
Oo, perpok me. Pero that's only to list a few. At ito pa, according sa isang article na nilabas ng GMA noong 2010, malaki rin yung naging epekto ni megastar Sharon Cuneta sa pagkapanalo ni Kiko Pangilinan.
At speaking of Sharon Cuneta, di ba parang may recent ad yan sila ni kay
Oo,
Kiko?
pag may Kiko.
May Sharon.
Oh, galing!
Give yun, give.
Pero, balik muna tayo sa topic ng influencers pagdating sa mga kampanya. Kasi 'di ba, gets naman na natin yung mga artista kasi super sikat sila. Pero pag influencers, parang masyadong vague yung definition or yung standards sa pagpili sa kanila.
Exactly. And speaking of vague, recently, no, personally, napapansin ko lang na parang marami sa mga academicians and mga scholars ay talagang ginagawang focus na yung pag-aaral ng ganito. And as a matter of fact, na-publish sa International Journal of Communication yung role nga raw nitong mga influencers tuwing elections, specific na tuwing elections, na sinasabi na parang nagsisilbi raw itong mga influencers na amplifier ng mga political messages. So, itong mga content creators na to, ang nangyayari is ine-echo nila yung cause ng specific candidate.
So, regardless if they are paid or unpaid, and no matter how wide their reach is, mayroon pa rin silang audience and viewers that they have some kind of influence on.
Well, maganda yung point na nilabas din nitong CNN. Baka nabasa mo ha,
Okay.
na may mga certain privileges daw itong mga influencers when they're promoting.
Oo, nabasa ko rin yan. Sabi nga doon na parang hindi naman daw obligado yung mga to na i-disclose kung bayad sila o hindi. So, parang alas na sa kanila kung genuine ba yung pag-endorse o pilit lang kasi bayad sila. Alam mo, buti pa yung mga brand sponsors kasi required silang i-disclose kapag bayad. Pero pag politiko, bakit wala?
Kasi ganun talaga, wala namang clear guidelines yung mga to. So, di rin talaga may ensure yung transparency in political advertisements tulad ng nangyayari ngayon.
Pero teka lang. Na-discuss na natin yung celebrities. Tas after that, yung mga influencers. Pero hindi pa rin natin napag-uusapan kung anong pinagkaiba nila.
Well, gets kita. Okay, kasi may mga influencers na celebrities din.
So ano ang pinagkaiba nila?
Technically, celebrities are people na madalas nating napapanood sa mga TV, sa mga programa nila like teleserye, pelikula, at any mga casting.
Yes, ang bongga mo dyan, Maria. Alam na alam talaga.
Ay nako, maliit na bagay.
Pero, correct me if I'm wrong.
Go!
Ang pinagkaiba lang talaga ng celebrities and influencers ay yung origin nila. Yung mga artists, they are popular because of their artistic value. Kagaya ng acting, saka yung beauty nila na ipinapakita. Pero yung influencers, binuo nila yung reputation and popularity nila from scratch through their contents. kumbaga, iba yung concept ng pag-idolize natin sa mga artista kaysa sa mga influencers because it is largely based on their content.
Per poke. 10, 10, 10.
Yes.
Ganon. At dahil dyan, ayun ang score mo, no? Pero tama yung binanggit mo. Ang main difference and advantage talaga nitong mga influencers is yung relatability nila sa kanilang mga audience. Kung i-compare kasi natin yung types of contents na pinapublish ng celebrities and influencers, more on slice of life, yung mga a day in a life of keme-keme, yung mga pinoproject nitong mga influencers.
So, parang ang projection nila, gusto nilang maging approachable sa audience. Kasi dito nakikita yung same interest, background, and yung situation.
Well, kaya mas malaki yung hatak nitong mga influencers kaysa sa mga celebrity.
Kaya rin pala mas pinipili nila na magpa-endorse sa influencers imbis sa celebrities. Kasi bukod pa sa mas marami, mas mura, syempre mas malawak din yung reach nila. At lalong-lalo na, mas malapit sila sa mga manonood.
Exactly. Kaya nga sila tinawag na influencers from the word itself.
Oo
diba?
nga, no? Pero bukod pa doon, idagdag na rin natin na they have less rules, risks, and expectations. Kaya naman talagang perfect candidate sila for political endorsements.
Kaya to list some lang mga nandyan, no? Timpayaman, Toro Family, and
Correct.
syempre, the celebrity turned influencer na si Tony Gonzaga.
Alam mo, comparing their contents, Team Payaman portrays the rags to riches narrative, while yung Toro family naman, kumbaga para siyang isang reality series na ipinapakita yung chaotic side nila, pero entertaining pa rin talaga to sa viewers.
Exactly. Pasok na pasok yung ganong content sa kanal humor na gustong-gusto nating i-consume lately. Pero kung magpo-focus focus tayo dun sa Team Payaman, di ba parang may naging controversial take yan sa mga fans?
Oo nga. Well, technically, in-address ito ni V. Cortez, yung asawa ni Kong, about dun sa naging collaboration niya with Camille Villar. And alam mo ba, si Camille Villar, isa siyang aspirant na binabalita ang gumastos ng lagpas bilyon para sa kanyang advertisement campaigns.
Ayun yung parang nag-supermarket na grocery sila, di ba?
Diba? Ang sketchy.
Well, hindi naman kasi or never naman talaga magiging isang simpleng collaboration or advertisement yung mga ganong videos, lalo na kung may kasama kang political aspirant.
Tama. Lagit-lagi yang may mga motibo. Like, for example, di ba? Nakita mo ba yung pinost dati ni Gaya Poli sa X? Well, formerly Twitter, about a collaboration notice.
Ayan ba yung sa anonymous na nangangandidato raw?
Oo, si Mare.
Ayun. So, well, technically, ang sabi lang naman doon ay nagre-reach out daw yung office nila for a possible collaboration.
Kaya nga. And alam mo, ang ganda nung naging response ni Gaya about it.
Tama yun. Gustong-gusto ko nga yung parang binanggit niya na bakit nga ba natin papakawalan ang ating principles, values, para sa pera? Para lang makapagbudot sa mga trapo at mga kandidato ng political dynasty?
Well, ika nga nila sa content creation world, you are what you promote. So makikita talaga natin kung ano yung mga pinapahalagahan mo based sa mga ipinapalabas mong content.
Pero syempre, para mas palalimin pa yung talakayan natin, nag-invite ang aming team. Ang aming team!
Yes, nag-imbita kami ng isang professional sa field para ituro yung theoretical concepts behind this.
Ang ating special guest ay isang assistant professor ng speech communication with a BA and MA in speech communication from UP Diliman.
Bigatin! Ang kanyang research interests ay tungkol sa gender studies, popular culture, at rhetoric in children's literature.
Kaya naman, tawagin na natin si Assistant Professor Christine Joy Magpayo. Hello, magandang hapon po. Ako po si Ralph.
Hi, Ralph.
Hello. Ralph po. Ralph.
Ayan, ma'am. Hello po. Ako po si Rice. Iboto niyo po ako sa darating na eleksyon.
Ayan, at welcome po sa DiversifiED Plus episode natin for today. So meron lang po kaming ilang mga katanungan tungkol sa papalapit na eleksyon at kung paano kumokonekta itong mga influencers, celebrity, at syempre yung pag-endorso ng mga politiko ngayon. And starting with our first question, mahalaga na siguro itatag natin kung ano nga ba itong pinag-uusapan natin. So, based po sa inyong expertise, ano nga ba yung personality politics populism and celebrification?
Siguro for a disclaimer lang I think a political science professor could better frame the definitions. But on the perspective of a communication teacher, I'd say that when you talk about personality politics, it's not really a theory. It doesn't have these dimensions, these factors. But when you talk about personality politics, essentially from the word itself, you're relying on your personality to be liked. You're relying on your personality to gain favor from the voting populace, and because of that, you tend to you tend to use populist rhetorical strategies. Now, what are examples of these? Ano ba yung intentions when you talk about populism? The thing about it is that in the abstract sense, when you talk about populism, it's more of you are considering that there are essentially people who want the most simplest of things. So, for example, when we talk about populism in the context of Philippines, we remember Isko Moreno, we remember Rodrigo Duterte, we remember Manny Villar. And why is that? What do they have in common? They are populist in a sense that they try to appeal to these people whose basic needs have to be met. And so they're using the most simple of offers as if it's so easy to give them. Like, say, for example, if you recall, and it's funny because my generation still remembers that song, Nakalangoy Ka Na Ba Sa Dagat ng Basura,
Yes.
or how Isko Moreno, if you watched his campaign songs, his campaign jingles, and he was there, one of the most memorable campaign jingles we talked about in Persuasion in the Post, which was an initiative of our department last time. He used rap, and essentially he talked about himself, how he was also just a poor man who actually tried his best to, alam mo yun, makaraos sa buhay, and how, of course, Duterte is just saying to us na, oh sige, mawawala ang drugs in 6 months. And everyone wants safety. Everyone wants to aspire for a president who understands them. And so, nagwo-work sa kanila yon. A lot of people would say, para siyang appeal sa masa. But I always remind my students na hindi siya pwedeng sabihin na masa lang. Or hindi, we cannot claim that the mass is a group of people that we have to educate, because ultimately, my personal belief is there is a lot to learn from them. Na parang hindi sila yung dapat i-educate mo. No, it doesn't work that way, at least for me. So, ayun yung tingin ko sa connection ng personality politics and a populist rhetoric. And the next term you mentioned was
Celebrification.
celebrification. Of course, coming from the term celebrity, they paint themselves as celebrities, or they hire celebrities. They actually tap influencers and micro influencers to actually paint a good picture of them. So essentially, what they want to do, because of celebrification, either you are a celebrity, and of course, you're making a spectacle out of the election. So you're dancing, you're singing, you're showing them how entertaining this is, how you do anything for them. And part of this whole celebrification is also choosing the right people to campaign to choosing the right people to campaign for you, choosing the right people to put in a good word for you. So that's celebrification. But also, later on, we might touch on this. And I want you to put emphasis on this, that I really don't think that it's working as much as it used to work. Like, say, for example, of course, I lived in Pasig for a long time, and you realize Vico Soto could have used his capital to celebrify his campaign, but he doesn't. And yet, the people still like him. And the camp that's going for the mayorship, who's not part of the party of Vico Soto, they're using celebrification. They have Aramina, they have Shamsi Sup Sup, and yet people are still parang wala pa rin silang hold doon sa tao. But why? So when is it working? When is it not working? And those are things we might touch on later on.
Ayun po, ma'am. Nabanggit po natin kanina yung celebrification. Siguro may tanong lang din po ako. Kasi base po dun sa nabasa kong article back then from Archer and Coston na nag-aaral din po ng celebrity politics. Binanggit po nila na yung celebrities, meron silang epistemic power. So they are seen credible and they are given attention to in ways other people are not. So, in connection po sa influencers, sa tingin niyo po ba yung epistemic power na ito ay na-apply din sa influencers po natin ngayon?
Alright, perhaps it's also important to define what an influencer is. So ultimately, different literature would tell us, influencer ka kapag ka may X number of following ka, or influencer ka kapag ka this specific brands already get you, or influencer ka kapag ka ito na yung you maintain a specific viewership for X amount of time. So it's the term influencer is something we can operationalize. And the possibilities are endless. Now, the thing is, celebrities can also be still considered influencers. So if we're going to talk about micro-influencers, or those who are not really celebrities, those are not, yung mga hindi artista, mga hindi singer, if we're going to talk about that, and we want to talk about their power, I think there has been a shift ever since marketing people, public ad people, the marketing people and public relations people started tapping them to actually promote brands. But why them? And I think it's because over time, consumers have been smart enough to realize that, hey, these people, the celebrities, are being paid. They're getting millions for it. Versus, pag tinignan mo yung isang micro-influencer na parang they're inspirational and aspirational because their status is something that the consumer can achieve. Na parang, okay, you understand na, hindi siya kasing milyonarya kumpara ni celebrity. And therefore, nakikita mo, mas malapit ka sa kanya, mas may lapit. And therefore, you realize, pag in-endorse niya tong specific product or brand na to, I can try this. I can afford to try this. And once it works with you, nagkakaroon ka ng trust. And now, we're saying that itong mga micro-influencers or influencers na nagpo-promote ng mga tested product, biglang magpo-promote ng isang tao for election. We have this tendency, of course, to apply the same principle. Nung ginamit niya itong skincare na to, nag-work sa akin. Baka naman pag sinabi niyang worthy candidate si person, baka naman mag-serve talaga. So it's a connection, the trust is built, that your ethos, your credibility is something you build on. Na hindi sila nag-appear na dahil may million followers ka, susundin ka. So, it's not like that. That I think that the power of these influencers are actually stemming from a long established relationship, a parasocial relationship with the people who are following them.
So, nabanggit niyo po kanina na parang nagkakaroon ng collaboration itong influencers na ito sa politicians. So, maaari niyo po bang i-explain po sa amin kung ano po yung driving factors behind these innocent collaborations between politicians and influencers? And dahil usapin po ito ng social media, maaari niyo din po bang banggitin po sa amin yung agenda setting model?
Alright, when you talk about the agenda setting model or the agenda setting theory, of course, we're saying that everything is intentional. That at the end of the day, when you talk about rhetoric, when you talk about politics, everything has an end goal. And part of that is realizing that you have to curate an image of you that is, of course, you want to be liked. But at the end of the day, yun naman yung gusto natin. You want to gain favor, you want to persuade a public to actually take your side, to actually view you in a positive way. And so, in the context of election, the thing about this is that it's very crucial that you understand that you have to maintain a very specific brand, not just during the campaign, but what has been your brand even before you actually started campaigning. Otherwise, nababawasan yung ethos mo. And I think something that we can think of na at the top of my head, it was, I forgot what it's called, but Lenny Robredo had this TikTok video of her. What was it? The Dragon Ball Z move? I forgot.
Yes, Dragon
It
Ball.
was, and people bashed her for that. Even the kakamping said, "What's that? What are you doing? It's not you." And you realize na, oo nga no, na kahit uh, yun yung gagawin ng taong gusto mo kapag ito ay hindi na naaayon sa na-establish niyang way of behavior, way of speaking, way of acting, hindi siya kakagatin. And dun siguro nang gagaling yung belief ko na mas matalino na talaga yung voters ngayon. That we don't just want to be entertained. We really want, we have this certain criticality that just must be poked. It has to be poked because sa tingin ko kasi minsan natutulog siya. That's why we still have candidates and they have a following because sige, mamimigay sila ng jacket. During a press a media conference, sabihin lang nila, hep hep hooray. I mean, it's viral and people, they still get the support of people. And that's part of celebrification. It's just difficult to connect the dots and especially to establish causation and correlation primarily because there are still a lot of factors to take into consideration. Say, for example, you were asking me a while ago na ano po kaya yung nangyayari yung implication ng, and you also said innocent collaborations. But the thing about that is we have to understand that even people have attitudes and behaviors that are already innate. Say, for example, you had this student at inupuan, I was a panelist for her thesis defense at gusto niyang pag-aralan bakit nga ba yung mga tao sa isang lugar na to ay solid na Bongbong Marcos. Alright? Is it really because of the influencers? Is it really because of the celebrities campaigning? And you realize na parang, hindi eh. It's also because of the family narratives. Now, we think sobrang laki ng influence ng mga influencers ng artista. But if you think about it that way, if you look at the case of Lenny Robredo, nung bandang huli ng campaign, she was being endorsed by Nadine Lustre. She was being endorsed by Bembol Rocco, saying na ang totoong matigasin na lalaki, di ba? Parang you're willing to put your trust to a woman also. Na ang daming influencers and celebrities campaigning for her, pero bakit hindi pa rin? So we want to establish the influence of influencers. And yes, they have an influence, but it's only to a certain extent. Kasi at the end of the day, nandyan yung pamilya mo at sila yung bumuo ng belief system mo, sila yung bumuo ng worldview mo. And so lalaki ka thinking that these narratives are true, these narratives are correct. And there's also a term called the delegative democratic attitude, something we touched on in class recently, na parang simplistically, I mean, you could explain this for an entire sem, but I couldn't do that here, but I have a few minutes to do it. Essentially, when you talk about that, we can say it's for people who are so fed up with the government who's promising a lot of big things pero hindi nila na-achieve. Like say for example, coming from presidents na nag-focus sa economy, like Noynoy Aquino, like Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, economists, di ba? And people think, hindi ko naman naiintindihan yan. Feeling nila walang ginagawa. And so, now, we had, there comes Rodrigo Duterte saying, ang problema lang naman talaga drugs. And people just embraced it. People just believed it. And it's not just because may mga nag-campaign sa kanya. It's also because of his personal rhetoric. Diba? Now, we can't just attribute that success to influencers. Yes, they have their they have their power. He had Mocha Uson, he had Sasason, and what did they have in common? They used the language of the lay. It was so simple na ito nga yung sinasabi ni Cicero from the ancient Rome. It senses communis. It's a sense of community. And therefore, these influencers, whether they're spreading fake news or whether they're spreading facts, ang sinasabi lang nila, ito yung pinapaniwalaan ko, at dahil naiintindihan yun ng sobrang daming tao, they're not using jargons, they're not using the vocabulary of academicians who just keep dropping theoretical terms na hindi naman naiintindihan ng maraming tao. 'Di ba? And so yun yung power nila. Ang power nila is simplicity, the ability to actually make things look simple. Na hindi naman talaga siya simple. Pero for you to be engaged, for you to actually get a good grasp of what's happening, you have to start with a language that's accessible and acceptable to a majority of the people. And I'm not just saying masses. Because I have to acknowledge na pag may naglakad dito sa harap natin na isang Paul user, marami yung terms na kahit ako, kahit professor ako, hindi ko agad naiintindihan. And similarly, kahit may isang major na pag nag-drop ako ng rhetoric or communication terms, hindi niya agad naiintindihan. That even the academicians find it difficult to understand each other because of our jargon. And that's the power of influencers. You can only influence them when you're using a language that they understand.
Yan. Gusto ko yung binanggit po ninyo na ang pinaka-power ng influencers is simplicity through language, no? Na kumbaga kaya nila mag-spread ng facts and ng fake news gamit lang yung simpleng language. Ngayon, to furtherly discuss this points of concern, I guess, no? Ano pa kaya yung other issues and points of concerns when it comes to these types of collaborations ni influencers and politician?
Alright, the thing about collaborations is that we're not alien to troll farms. They exist.
Yes, yeah.
There have been documentaries proving that they exist. And it's sad because now you can be an influencer because of shares, because of views. And you realize that not all of them are organic. And because not all of them are organic, some people are not aware of that. Na pwede pa lang yung 20 accounts dito ay hindi totoong tao. Na pwede pa lang yung nagko-comment at nag-a-agree, they're actually just sharing a script na nire-restructure, pinapalitan lang nila ng iba't ibang words. And that's really a big issue in my opinion. That's one. The second, I think, is, of course, well, I don't really appreciate early campaigning, and none of us should appreciate. Some people, di ba, parang hindi in-effortan kanya ng aga pa, but there are rules. And I think rules must be in place so that everything is done fairly. Also the budget, na parang how are candidates actually reporting their budget? Kasi ultimately, a lot of influencers still get I'm not sure a lot of them are getting paid by money, or they're being promised positions, or if they're being, promised viewership or projects in the future. But ayun yung mga nakikita nating concerns. And siguro, personally then, we have to consider the campaign as if it's an opportunity for us to choose kasi. Para siyang brand na when you're trying to campaign for yourself, you're selling yourself, diba? Instead of a product, you're selling yourself. And in the process of selling yourself, there is of course a concern on fact-checking on social media. And it's so difficult right now because a lot of people think pagka kumuha ka ng isang picture, nilagyan mo ng quote at nilagyan mo ng logo ng isang of course, ng isang network, they think it's true. People don't fact check anymore, and this is a pressing problem that a lot of news outlets right now are actually sharing things, and sila yung binabrand as kayo yung mga fake news peddler eh. And these are real people. There are people on my feed who think, biased ng network na to. Baka nga fake news. And if you ask them, sino yung pinapaniwalaan nyo? They're the influencers. And why is that? Again, babalik kasi tayo sa naiintindihan nila yung language na to. Say for example, the ICC case, na parang a lot of people, they don't really understand. If you're not a research, if you haven't really studied research, mahirap sa ating pag-aralan or maintindihan sa mga tao yung the concept of a sample size. They believe na, akala ko ba 1,000? Bakit sa report 30, 40 something lang? So, ayun yung mga concern. People are not really getting into the business of fact-checking anymore. And the thing is, it's really ego. Parang whenever my friends and I talk about it, ang nababanggit namin is, bakit gano'n na pag hinaharapan mo na sila ng fact. So, of course, fact-checking is an issue. But the thing is, sometimes people fact-check and it's really just their pride getting in the way now. Kasi, they look up to a certain politician and they look up to certain influencers and celebrities as if they're people worth worshiping. And suddenly, ang hirap sa kanilang sabihin na, ay, oo nga, mali ako. Diba? And if more people would actually come out and say, nagkamali ako, binoto ko yan dati, baka there's this bravery, there's this courage to actually say, okay, I made a mistake there. But a lot of people are just being blinded right now by their egos. And of course, there's also a concern on the kind of discourse happening online. Na personally, we want people, I think all of us want, gusto lang naman natin ng a peaceful society, a fair society. But how can that happen? Na feeling natin, pag natatrigger tayo ng mga tao na hindi sinishare yung political beliefs natin, ano yung tendency sabihin? And I wouldn't say it, diba? But we tend to judge them. We tend to say things that could be offensive. And ultimately, because that happens, we're actually shutting doors. That instead of being invitational, instead of using invitational rhetoric, and when you talk about invitational rhetoric, it's you being willing to say that persuasion is just a bonus, because the old model of persuasion, your actual aim is to convince people that your view is correct. That's your goal. But when it comes to invitational rhetoric, it's part of the new rhetoric, and it's feminist rhetoric. You are here just to, if you think a Rogerian model of argumentation is basically saying, ito yung sinasabi mo, naiintindihan ko yung sinasabi mo, pero ito rin yung sinasabi ko. And eventually, if in the process, they actually realize, oo nga no, may point ka rin, then you're making room for persuasion to happen. Kasi very aggressive. Now, we're so frustrated. So, I don't want to put the blame on just the people who don't fact check. Because I think I also have to make sure that the people who know the facts are accountable enough to say, how did you present the facts? Kasi kung kinailangan mong mang-apak ng tao, kung kinailangan mong manlait ng tao para lang patunayan na tama ka, we can't get where we want to be.
Okay po. Given po kanina na may reinforcement ng dominant narratives and of course yung polarization sa social media, ano pa po ba yung advice na maaari nyo pong maipahayag sa ating audiences, especially to our young voters when consuming this type of content? So bukod po sa fact-checking, ano pa po siguro yung kailangan po nilang malaman pa?
For first-time voters, I think what's important is to actually give them agency. You have to, because we don't have the numbers yet. It's the first time they're voting. And I'm a firm believer of making do with the data you have. We don't have their data. We don't know their voting patterns. We don't know their voting behaviors yet. So before we give them advice, siguro, ako lang ang masasabi ko, I think we ought to give them the agency to decide. And once we see the turnout of how do they vote and why do they vote that way, doon lang tayo talaga makakagawa ng isang, hindi na makagawa ng advice, but more of we can actually come up with an analysis that's grounded on that specific data. But when it comes to, for example, Gen Zs, millennials who are not voting for the first time, who have experienced voting, of course, it's easier said than done. But you always keep telling them na, oh, i-check nyo yung platform, or oy, i-check nyo yung track record. We keep saying these things, but somehow they're not working. So, right now, ang naiisip ko na tip for people who consume, for example, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram videos of campaign of politicians. This is something I used to measure the kind of friends I have. Na parang, ang tanong ko, kung sakali bang magkaanak ako, maiiwanan ko ba to sa bahay nila? And I say this because it really made me sad thinking that, a lawyer who's running for a position in Pasig is a lawyer and then he's viral right now. Won't say the name anymore. Parang magjo-joke ka na for single mom to
Yeah.
actually, di ba, parang, oh, yung mga single mom, as long as you're still menstruating, you can actually, di ba, do the deed
Yeah.
with me.
Uh-huh.
And parang it's infuriating na, what? This person said this. And kung may anak ba akong babae, do I feel safe na iiwanan ko yun sa bahay niya? And if the answer is no, ako, I won't. It's the same principle na parang siguro I don't understand then. This is a different issue altogether na parang a lot of people, and I also feel sad thinking na I have a lot of friends on Facebook. Some of them are parents already. And they really want to nullify the arrest of the former president. And a lot of them also acknowledge, they understand that there were deaths. Some of them deny it, some of them understand na may namatay talaga through extrajudicial killings. But at the end of the day, ayun din yung siguro magandang i-share na, okay, safe ba lahat ng bata dito? Na parang, the thing about this, in a, of course, in a political science, in a rhetoric lens, people only act if they see its direct impact on the self. So, ayun yung ma-advise ko na parang we should, it's really abstract that you have to think not just for yourself, but if you want to be a parent for your future kid, or if you have siblings or younger relatives, you also think about them. And I'm saying this not in a, nepotism kind of way.
Yeah.
Na parang sometimes people are voting kasi, makikinabang ka pag siya. Hindi yun eh. But people who are actually detached, na wala naman talagang relatives sa politics, they actually have to consider na, will this generation be safe in a place led by this kind of person, by this kind of people?
Okay. Salamat po. And I think we are down to our last question for this segment. Well, as a communications expert, Ma'am Tin, ano pa sa tingin mo, or ano ba yung isang pinakamalalim na bagay or insight na natututuhan dapat or matututuhan ng mga tagatanggap sa mga ganitong content or trend kung saan yung influencers and politicians ay nag-iisa or napag-iisa na?
Okay. Identification comes to mind. So it's a term coined by Kenneth Burke, and essentially identification is the new persuasion. When we talk about identification, it means that I identify with this person. So you're different but same. Very Catholic nga yun eh, very consubstantiation. Na parang you are the same but you are also different, and in a way, if once you identify with a person, you realize that you no longer need persuading kasi nakaka-identify ka na eh. Once you see yourself in that person, you feel like you're sharing the same values, the same principles already. And having mentioned the identification, I think that what we can learn actually from this is to try to step out, step back, step out of the whole picture, and actually think objectively. Na when you think about it, kailangan clear sa'yo. Because if you have a parasocial relationship, yun naman yun, whether it's celebrity or an influencer. And when we talk about parasocial relationships, na parang, feeling ko ate ka siya. Feeling ko, it's an imagined relationship, diba? It's a made-up illusion na pinaparamdam niya sa akin na siya ay isang nanay na papakinggan ko. Things like that. Okay? And that works, especially in the Philippines. If you look at our commercials, we're a very pathos, very emotion-driven people. And we have to step back and ask ourselves, do I really see myself, do I really identify with this influencer? And when you ask yourself, do you identify with this influencer? If pina-follow nyo na talaga siya, lubusin nyo na. Tignan nyo, paano siyang makisama sa iba? Paano siyang, what kind of person is this? And kailangan siguro, I trust that people are smart enough to think na, is this influencer doing it because they believe in the politician, or are they doing it because there's a monetary gain from it? Kasi magkaiba rin yun. Ayun din siguro, dun ako nahihirapan minsang i-separate yung artists with who they're campaigning for. You realize na, oo nga no, sometimes what if they're just they're just supporting a candidate because they need a gig. They need to be paid. And it's sad when people also shame them just because, wala na palang prinsipyo si ganito, si ganyan. And I've been reading a lot about the recent UP Fair. Yung,
Yes.
yeah, di ba? May mga pagtanggalan nangyari. And we don't know, we're not sure. And I think it helps a lot to, imagine all possible scenarios. Kasi ang nagiging mistake natin, feeling natin, perfect tayo. What difference does that make if we think that we have this, that we are untouchable, that our knowledge is what makes us superior? Because our superiority complex prevents us from really understanding what's happening on the ground. Bakit kaya nag-yes yung artist? Bakit kaya si influencer na to kinakampaign siya? Na minsan mararamdaman mo naman na magugulat ka rin, bakit ito yung kinakampaign niya? And you have to stop for a moment and ask yourself why. To what extent will I actually follow the advice of someone I follow? To what extent should we believe that this politician would really be good for the country, would really actually serve the people?
Muli, maraming salamat po, Ma'am Tin, dahil marami kaming nalaman tungkol sa retorika na ginagamit ng influencers at politiko.
Ngayon na nakausap na natin ang isang communication expert, alamin naman natin kung ano nga ba ang say ngayon ng mga netizens tungkol dito.
Sa isang Reddit post sa r/Philippines, sinasabi nito na after movie stars, vloggers are now running for office. Kung saan pinapakita dito ang isang Facebook post na naglilista ng mga celebrity na tumatakbo para sa public office noong day 1 ng pagpa-file ng Certificate of Candidacy.
Well, ito nga yung nabasa kong comment doon. Sabi, ako lang ba ang nag-iisip na dapat ang pagpasok sa politika parang pag-a-apply din sa normal jobs na dapat may related knowledge or degree ka sa pinapasok mo na posisyon?
Alam mo, gets na nakakapanghinayang minsan pag may nakikita tayong celebrities na tumatakbo kasi madalas na sila ang nananalo.
So speaking of pagtakbo kasi, ito ang nalalaman ko ha, yung minimum na legal requirements to run for office is, una, kailangan citizen ka, kailangan Filipino. Pangalawa, yung residency sa Philippines o yung munisipalidad kung saan mo gusto tumakbo. Pangatlo, syempre, dapat registered voter ka rin. And ability to read and write para sa pang-apat. And lastly, ayun nga, walang mandated na minimum educational attainment o kahit anumang experience para makatakbo ka sa office.
Well, bakit nga ba wala tayong stricter, quote-unquote, qualifications? Well, ang layunin kasi ay para magkaroon ng political inclusivity, kung saan hindi magiging hadlang ang socio-economical na kalagayan ng tao sa pagtakbo for public office. And konektado din ito sa educational attainment.
Konektado kasi yung usapin ng socio-economico sa pag-aaral o sa educational attainment kung yun yung ay isa sa magiging qualification sa pagtakbo, 'di ba? Ngayon, alam naman natin at aware tayo na kung sino yung mas may kakayahan sa buhay, sila rin yung may access sa education. So ngayon, parang sinasabi, doon pa lang sa part na yon na kung sino lang ang nakapagtapos o kung sino lang ang makikaya para makapagtapos, sila lang yung pwedeng tumakbo. 'Di ba?
Tama. At saka higher educational requirements may unintentionally reinforce the elite while barring the socio-economical disadvantaged from running for office.
Kaya siguro para mas mabigyang pansin natin itong komentong ito, hindi naman sa binibigay o ipinapasa natin yung bigat ng responsibilidad para sa mga sa mga tagapakinig o sa mga Pilipino. Pero again, tayo ay mga Filipino. So, responsibilidad at nasa sa atin talaga yung kapangyarihan kung sino yung iboboto natin. Ngayon, wala man yung educational attainment, yes, pero again, maraming kwalifikasyon, marami silang mga plataforma na maaari nating pwedeng tingnan kung iboboto talaga natin sila, no? Because at the end of the day, anyone can run, but it is up to us whether they win.
Dito naman sa isang post sa r/Philippines, ulit ha, na cancel culture, politics, and influencers, sinasabi nila na dapat daw i-cancel ang mga influencer na publicly sumusuporta kay BBM o yung nagde-discuss ng news, social, or political issues na mayroong bias.
Hot take, hot topic.
Agree ka ba
Alam mo,
doon?
yung usapin kasi talaga ng cancel culture, yan, I think and based on my knowledge, parang mas kumbaga, mas umalingasaw lang siya nung naging usap-usapin itong mga influencers, TikTokers, and mga content creators. So, ikaw, sa tingin mo ba, should people really cancel those they disagree with politically? Or like, for example, ikaw, may friend ka, nag-share o DDS o kaya supporter ng mga Marcoses. Ikaw, for example, nakakita ka ng post na gano'n, i-unfriend mo ba or i-unfollow mo?
Okay. So, babalik tayo doon sa pinag-usapan kanina ng ating guest speaker na mahalaga pa rin makipag-engage tayo sa discourse. Alam naman natin ngayon na sa social media, meron tayong tinatawag na polarization. So, at saka yung algorithm na rin, ano?
Exactly.
So, kung halimbawa, pinanood ito ng isang audience at yun na lang ang nakikita nila, wala nang ibang other narratives, syempre, yun ang tatanggapin nila bilang totoo. So, I believe na hindi dapat natin silang i-cancel or i-unfollow dahil magkaiba tayo ng pananaw. Kasi, again, sa invitational rhetoric na sinabi kanina, maganda talaga na makipagdiskurso tayo. Makita natin yung both sides ng truths na ipinapakita sa atin.
Oo, tama yon. Pero hindi dapat nagtatapos. Ako, to continue the thought lang na parang hindi dapat nagtatapos sa hindi natin sila i-unfollow, i-unfriend. So ngayon, kasi if gano'n ang mangyayari, yung pag-share natin ng information is iikot lang doon sa echo chamber na mabubuo ng kapareho natin ng narrative or ng viewpoints pagdating sa politics, no? Pero again, kumbaga, kailangan ipagpatuloy yon na we need to educate them at some point. At hindi naman nag-end or hindi naman sa simpleng shared posting lang magagawa yung education na yon.
Tama.
I believe yung pag-create ng discourse, dahil very accessible naman ng social media, try to reply sa post na yon or comment something with respect pa rin. 'Di ba? Parang sabi nga kanina ni Ma'am Tin, na parang gets ko yung sinasabi mo, pero kasi facts. Ganon ang atake.
So, kumbaga walang bangayan, parang all is well lang. Okay tayong lahat.
Well, mahirap naman mangyari yan.
Tama.
Pero, baka kaya.
Oo.
So, doon kasi siya sa end nitong mga tagatanggap. Pero, paano naman yung mga influencers mismo? Ano, should all influencers use their platforms to discuss politics? Another hot take.
Actually, maraming nagsasabing tao na oo, kasi may platform sila. So, ibig sabihin, meron silang moral duty na, dapat, dahil malawak yung reach mo, gamitin mo yung platform mo sa tama.
Well, dapat gano'n naman talaga. Ako naniniwala ako na dapat gano'n. Kasi, bago ka maging isang influencer, bago ka maging isang content creator o celebrity, naging Filipino ka muna. Isa kang mamamayan at responsibilidad natin ang mamili at maghalal ng mga taong uupo sa Senado o kahit sa mga kalungsuran lang na mayroong katapatan talaga at merong puso para sa ating mga mamamayan. So, again, nasa sa kanila yung paggamit ng kanilang platform kasi baka mamaya at the end of the day, baka isipin nila, hala, hindi ko na brand yan. baka mawala na sa mga a day in the life nila or baka wala na sa mga reviews ng product. Pero ano ba naman yung banggitin mo lang, ipakita mo at subukan mong subukin yung mga nakikinig at nanonood sa'yo, di ba?
Tama yun, hindi lahat ng nakikita, nababasa, napapanood natin, tama na. So, kailangan nating i-challenge bilang viewers kung ano yung ibinabanggit ng dominant narratives na ito. And once again, kaninong interest ba ang siniserve ng ganitong mga narratives?
Exactly. So, usapin ng interest, no? Magandang tingnan natin siya, no? Kung off-branding na yung ginagawa ni influencer and nakapag-shake talaga siya ng idea ng mga viewers niya, then it only means I feel effective siya as an influencer.
Saka, once again, bilang mga influencers na may malawak na plataforma, kailangan maging mindful din tayo dahil, again, maraming nakikinig at nanonood sa atin. So, ayun. Grabe, no?
Grabe.
Yun ang iilan sa mga saloobin ng ating netizens.
Kaya, dahil dyan, gawin na rin natin itong reminder na people, pag-isipan natin ng mabuti kung sino nga ba ang mga iboboto natin sa susunod o sa paparating na eleksyon. Kilatisin ang mga kandidato at alamin ang mga plano nila.
Oo, dapat lagi tayong maging choosy. Hindi lang sa love life, ha? Pati na rin sa balota.
True na true. Ika nga nila, knowledge is power. At ang paraan natin para labanan ang mga ganitong pagpopropaganda ay ang pagre-research.
Oo. At dapat talaga, hindi natin kukunin ang mga opinion o post sa internet at face value, gaya ng nabanggit natin kanina, nang hindi muna nagre-research. Dahil kailangan nating malaman yung konteksto o yung katotohanan na itinatago dito.
Pinaka-importante rin na alalahanin na mayroon talaga tayong kapangyarihan. At ano to, itong kapangyarihan na to, Rice?
Bumoto!
Tama. Kaya wag natin kalimutang bumoto sa paparating na halalan 2025.
Magaganap din ang midterm elections sa May 12, 2025 para bumoto sa mga senator, district at party list representative, governor, mayor at councilor. Kaya sama-sama tayong bumoto sa May 12.
Sige, Mi, sasamahan kita. Basta,
Yes.
go tayo sa TC after.
Oo.
Pero kita-kit sa May 12.
And at the end of the day, kahit anong sabihin ng mga influencer at kahit sino man ang tumakbo sa halalan, tayo pa rin ang may kapangyarihan na bumoto para sa mga tao na tingin nating karapat-dapat at mayroong kakayahan na baguhin ang Pilipinas for the better.
Pero sa totoo lang kasi, di naman talaga gagawin ng mga tumatakbo yung ganyang talagang pag-advertise, influencing na ito kung hindi talaga nila kailangan ng boto natin, 'di ba? Talagang
Correct.
gagastos sila at makikipag-collab kung kani-kaninong malakas yung reach. Kaya dapat isang muling paalala at para sa ating lahat, no, pahalagahan natin yung boto natin kasi ito yung magiging boses natin sa gobyerno. Grabe, right? Ang daming nangyari today at ang dami pala nating napag-usapan. Pero sadly, dahil alam mo naman, lahat may ending.
Hala, hindi pwede.
Patapos na ang episode natin.
Hala, Ralph, alam mo, mamimiss ko ang mga viewers at listeners natin.
Kayo, mamimiss niyo ba kami? Kasi mamimiss ko rin kayo. Kaya sana, subaybayan niyo ulit kami sa mga paparating na at susunod pang episode ng DiversifiED Plus. Muli ako po si Ralph Agan.
At ako naman si Rice Junicio. Boto niyo ako, ha? This episode of DiversifiED Plus was brought to you by the UP Broadcasters Guild. At muli,
Huwag kalimutang bumoto sa Halalan 2025. Bye!
Bye!
Bye, Ma!
Uy, bye, Rice.
Bye, Rice.
Ay, boto
Okay.
ka. Boto mo ako, ha?
Sige, ako din.
Sige.
Boto mo ako?
Talaga? Sige,
Bye-bye.
ha? Bye!
Bye.
Doon na ba lalabas?
Bye.
Labas na.